Hello, Year 7. Welcome to today's lesson on the poem My Father Thought It Bloody Queer. For this lesson, you'll need a pen and your book, a copy of the poem, highlighters, and coloured pens. I hope you enjoy reading and studying the poem. Thank you. Please could you write the date and the title, My Father Thought It Bloody Queer. For your do now, I would like you to consider what links the images on the slide together. Pause the video for 5 minutes to do this now. Okay, so as you worked out, probably they all involve some sort of piercing. So we've got the nose piercing around the bull, we've got a safety pin which can pierce through things, someone getting their ears pierced, and then the arrow on the last one, which of course can pierce things as well. So lesson objectives. To understand the narrative of an unseen poem, to be able to pick out key techniques and the effects they create, and to be able to make comments about language and structure. So I'd like you to read through the poem, then answer the following questions. What is the poem about? Think about the father's reaction to his son's arrival. What do you think he meant by bloody queer? Explain why the father's comment in lines 3 to 5 is an insult. What do you think the father felt when the son arrived home? And how do you think the son felt about the father's reaction? Once you have written your answers, view the next slide to add or correct your work. Okay, so the poem is about coming of age, asserting your own identity as the speaker in the poem has his ear pierced and his father disapproves. The poem shows the relation between parents and children. We see the son's assertion of independence and the father's disapproval. So, in terms of the term bloody queer, the quote is a colloquial and judgmental phrase, colloquial meaning informal. Queer is used to condemn something that doesn't conform. So why is the father's comment an insult? He thinks his son is easily led. The father is being sarcastic, comparing his son to a bull, being metaphorical, saying he should have had it through his nose instead. So how do you think the father felt? Possibly disgust, disappointment, despair, and disbelief. Probably all of the above. Queer suggests a particular disgust with his son, perhaps suggesting he is homosexual. During the poet's childhood, attitudes would have been very different and piercings would have been for women. Also, there was quite a lot of stigma or negative association with people being homosexual, whereas nowadays, of course, we're much more open and equal as a society, but then being seen as overly feminine or homosexual would have been an insult for a lot of people, which of course is very wrong. It shouldn't be like that, and generally isn't like that now. So the fact that he was easily led suggests a disappointment with his son. As a father, he probably feels despair that his son has done this knowing he will regret it and will not listen to his father, who has also made mistakes that his father warned him against. How do you think the son felt about the father's reaction? The poem speaker has clearly been affected by his father's comments. Perhaps he felt proud of his rebellion, perhaps he felt ashamed, perhaps he felt the loss of his childhood. So remember, note and pause the video to note down anything that you didn't get down yourself. Okay, so 1 minute challenge. On the next few slides, there'll be a section from the poem displayed. Some of the words are highlighted in red. Give yourself 1 minute to write down why they might be highlighted. Then move on to the next slide and add or correct answers you already have. And this is your first one. My father thought it bloody queer. So why has the words my father been highlighted in red? And as an extra challenge, can you find any additional language techniques? So pause the video for either 1 or 2 minutes. 1 minute if you're just doing the my father, 2 minutes if you're doing the challenge 2 to complete to finish the analysis on the slide. Okay, so starting with my father is very impactful. These words show that the focus of the poem is on the relationship with the father and his reaction, not just the event of the piercing. It informs you it is about the speaker's independence from his father and is about him growing up. Then we've got rolled, mop of hair, colloquial or informal language of teenagers at the time, nostalgic and his own voice. So nostalgia is when you look back fondly on something in the past. So when you look back at your time in E3 with me at Woking High, you may feel nostalgic, or maybe you won't. And then you've got a metaphor comparing him to a bull, a big animal like his big ego, but easily controlled. Okay, so bonus points for any additional techniques you see. So pause the video for 1 minute. Consider why easily you're led and your nose instead are significant. What is he comparing his son to? So clearly that is a bull. I hadn't had the nerve to numb. Pause the video for 1 minute if you're just analysing that phrase, or 2 minutes if you're trying to find any additional language techniques. So I hadn't had the nerve to numb contrasts his feeble approach with that of others who pierce their own ears. He makes fun of himself. Is he also ashamed of his cowardice? It's not a very successful teenage rebellion. And then you've got where it slept, personification, as if it is where it belongs, or potentially healing. So that's referring to the piercing. And it could indicate the piercing is not a part of him. So maybe he regrets it, he sees it as something other, or maybe it just hasn't become a part of him yet because it's so new. And they've got wound and wept. You've got alliteration to emphasize the pain. So next you've got saw, wound and wept. Pause the video for 1 minute if you're just analysing those words, or 2 minutes if you're trying to find additional language techniques. Okay, so it's as if the body is weeping for the fact he's injured it. Perhaps he also feels upset by his decision. And then you've got my own voice breaking, I'd take it out next year. He couldn't admit the mistake he had made at the time. Why? Pause the video for 1 minute to consider those two phrases and answer the question. Pause the video for another minute if you're doing the challenge. Okay, so this is his voice, but it sounds like what his father might have said. Has he come to share his father's values? Is removing the earring a sign of maturity or a sign of being ready to conform? You've got similes here too, like a tear released like water. Releasing of emotion compared to pouring of water indicates it's easy to release emotion. So he couldn't admit the mistake he had made at the time. So it could have been his immaturity, his pride, or the fact that he was ashamed. Okay, so I'd like you to complete the following sentences. The poem has a 3-part structure. The first 2 stanzas show, the last stanza is set, the poem is written in a what style, and there is very frequent irregular rhymes which emphasize what. Pause the video for 5 to 10 minutes to answer these questions. Okay, so the first 2 stanzas show what happened in the past. The last stanza is set when the poet was 29, so brings the poet up to date with what the event meant to him. The poem is written in a conversational style. You could have also written a colloquial style because it was quite informal. There is very frequent irregular rhymes which emphasize key words such as queer, ear, and here, year. Okay, so I'd like you to answer the following question using Peel. What do you think the speaker is saying about growing up? So we've done one really recently. So let's just go through it very briefly. The poet presents growing up in the poem as, this is shown when he refers to, the use of the word the poet uses then referred to a technique of language or structure. This displays the growing up theme because. Pause the video for however long you need to do your Peel paragraph. Okay, so check your answer with the one below. You may have had different thoughts and ideas, but that's fine. Just make sure you've analysed the language and or structure and that your answer has all the elements of the response below. So let's read through this one together. The poet presents growing up in the poem as being able to assert his own independence and therefore his own identity. This is shown when he refers to rolled home with a ring of silver in my ear. The use of the verb rolled suggests it wasn't a big deal to him, even though he knew it would provoke a reaction from his father. Having a ring in his ear changes his body from a child to an adult in his eyes. This is the opposite to what his father thinks. His father believes he is childish. This displays the growing up theme because there is a clear lack of understanding between the father and the poet. The differences emphasizes the struggle children face when growing up and the fact that children rebel in order to try and create an identity of their own, separate from their parents. Okay, so well done today's lesson, Year 7. I wonder what you'll do to rebel against your parents and show your identity as you go into teenagers. So thank you once again, and I'll speak to you next time.